Shabbat Shalom. Those of you who have taken a class with me before may have noticed that I often bring up midrash, which are the rabbis' storings and teachings that interpret confusing parts of the Torah. I'm getting a master's in midrash for my rabbinical school program. For the last several months, I've been taking a bunch of midrash exams. I have midrash on my mind a lot. But I've noticed that when I bring up this or that midrash, sometimes I'll get the reaction of, oh, that's nice. But it's nice, but it's just midrash. As if to say, it's not as relevant as halakha, as Jewish law. You know, the laws in the Torah and the laws of the rabbis give us guidance for how to cook our food and celebrate our holidays and eat and act ethically, how to live our lives. That's the law. Midrashim are just stories that you can take or leave. You know, that's true. In fact, a lot of rabbis have said that over the years too. But stories are how we make sense of the world. The narratives we tell ourselves about ourselves drive so much of our lives. That's why therapy can sometimes involve constructing new narratives about your past or about your present circumstances and abilities. And all nations, whether that's the nation of the Jewish people or the nation of the United States of America, are what the scholar Benedict Anderson calls imagined communities. There are 350 million Americans, almost, and we won't meet them all in our lifetime, but we tell ourselves that we share common values and have a sense of comradeship with each and every one of them. Having an identity as an American means more than just that you happen to have a piece of paper saying you're a citizen. Having an identity as a Jew means more than just having Jewish lineage or conversion status. What I think those extra things are might not be what you think those extra things are, but the point is that everyone feels that they're part of something greater. And those feelings come not from laws demanding what you should feel, but stories explaining how you already feel. It's in this week's Parsha, with the giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, that we get the apex narrative of construction of Jewish identity. And with it comes dozens upon dozens of midrashim, filling in the gaps of the text, each giving their own take on what happened there. I want to share three with you that I feel have a lot to say about our present moment. The first is that the Jews were not God's first choice to receive the Ten Commandments. According to this midrash, God first went to the descendants of Esau, who went on to become the Romans. And God asked them, will you accept the Torah? And the Romans said, well, what's in it? And God says, thou shalt not murder. And according to the midrash, the Romans respond by saying, and this is actually a literal translation of the original text, we can't do that. Murdering is our whole thing. The Moabites, the Ammonites, the Ishmaelites all get offered the Torah, but for one reason or another, they hear the Ten Commandments and decide that they can't hack it and turn it down. And finally, after going to literally every other nation, God goes to the Israelites and says, will you accept the Torah? And the Israelites respond by saying what we'll read next week, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do it and we will listen to it. Now, it seems likely that this midrash is in that category of writings where Jews who are oppressed take the opportunity to poke at the more powerful nations. It's like the rabbis are saying that while we may be on the bottom now, we are actually the superior ones. But it's still noteworthy that the Israelites were last on God's list. Think about it. There could have been a version of this midrash where God looks at all the nations of the world and judged the Israelites to be the best and purest and holiest and most worthy to receive the Torah without having to pitch everyone else. But instead, the Jews are not just the fallback option, they are the last resort. This, I think, is an important reminder for Jews not to be overly parochial. It's true that Jews have a special obligation to take care of each other, but if God's original plan was to give the Torah to the entire world, then it is incumbent upon us to follow in God's footsteps by sharing the lessons of Judaism with anyone who is willing to listen. Not to try to proselytize, to be clear, but to take seriously the idea that the Jewish people are meant to be, as the prophet Isaiah says, a light unto the nations, speaking publicly about how the wisdom and ethical teachings of the Torah can help repair and strengthen all of society, not just the Jewish community. Of course, one of the challenges that presents is it implies that there's one unified Jewish voice on a given issue. We know that for a lot of subjects, there are many, many, many different ways of Jewish doing and Jewish thinking. The second midrash teaches us that not only were all the Israelites who had escaped from Egypt present at Mount Sinai, but also all Jews who would ever live, their souls were also present at Mount Sinai. You were there, I was there, to receive and accept the commandments. Again, the reason for why the rabbis came up with this midrash is pretty easy to spot. The Israelites who had escaped Egypt were standing at Sinai, receiving the Torah, saying, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do it and we'll listen to it. Just because they agreed to follow the Torah doesn't mean that we in subsequent generations have to follow the Torah. I mean, I don't know about you. I don't remember ever agreeing to anything. Therefore, the rabbis say that you were also there, saying Na'aseh v'nishma, even if you don't remember it. Your soul gave consent to be bound up as part of the covenant, and everyone who was there was part of a united Jewish community who were all hearing and agreeing to the same thing, a remarkable example of Jewish unity that we can look to emulate at a time of so much division. Maybe. Because if the second midrash is about unity, the third is about individuality. According to this midrash, during the synesthetic experience at Sinai, when people's senses were so overwhelmed by God's presence that the Torah reports that they were seeing sounds and hearing visions. While this was happening, according to the midrash, everybody saw and heard something different from what their neighbors saw and heard. Rabbi Levi said that each person saw God with a different face looking directly at them. Rabbi Tanchuma said that each person heard a different voice of God according to their individual capacity to receive it. What a child heard is different than what an elderly person heard. What a man heard is different than what a woman heard, and therefore, to put the two midrashim in conversation with each other, what you heard when you were there is different than what I heard when I was there. Each of us heard God's instructions for how to build a holy life and a righteous society, and each of us got something unique. Every time that you encounter Torah, and by Torah I mean not just the 5 books of Moses, but all of the Jewish ideas you've inherited or come across, and for that matter, every time you have a question about how to live a more meaningful and engaged life, you are engaged in the millennia-old project of trying to suss out what God told you, what God told you at Sinai. We now have the Torah, as in the text of the Bible itself, as the starting point. But beyond that, we all heard something different. One midrash says that every Jew, past and future, stood united at Sinai, that we were all together. And another midrash says that every person's message from God was filtered through their own experience and capacity, that in some ways, each of us stood apart. Well, at first, these seem contradictory. For me, at least, they ring true right now. Since October 7th, I have never felt more connected to the Jewish community. I've never internalized more strongly that my fate is tied to that of every single other Jew on earth. And at the same time, another feeling has grown equally strong, that there are so many Jews who think about Judaism and what Judaism calls us to do wildly differently than I do. These Jews have made choices over the past 16 months, which they explicitly claim to have done to fulfill Jewish values, that read to me as, at best, highly misguided, and at worst, as gross distortions of God's teachings. It's been my challenge to remind myself that they too stood at Sinai and that they are acting based on what they heard there. This is not a call for moral relativism. There's still an objective right and wrong, regardless of whether your intentions are noble. But if anyone can figure out how to preserve feelings of community and unity despite vast differences of ideology and theology, it's the Jews. After all, we've been arguing with each other from the very beginning. Maintaining these connections across difference, seeing the holiness even in our ideological opponents, is one of our primary callings as Jews. Now, no one ever said that being a Jew would be easy. In fact, that's why all the other nations turned down the Torah. But if we can figure this out, if we can put into action our calling to stand together with those whose experiences and perspectives are opposite from ours, we will serve as a model for our fellow Americans at a time when division in our broader society seems so challenging as well. We don't tell the same story as Americans that we do as Jews. We will most definitely were not all standing together at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And the Jewish model of engaging with one's opponents, respecting and recognizing their legitimacy, acknowledging that they feel that their thoughts and actions are just as holy as you think yours are, is powerful. But admittedly, it doesn't always lead to compromise. And it assumes good faith in your opponent when they just might be perhaps motivated by a cynical pursuit of scapegoating and chaos for their own sake or their own benefit. But among people of good intentions, which Judaism tells us that we should believe most people are, this approach can lead to a healthier civic life. Of course, you don't have to buy any of this. It's just midrash. You can take it or leave it. They're just stories. But stories are powerful, and stories give our lives direction. And so the question is, what is the story that we want to tell ourselves about this moment in the history of our nations, the Jewish nation and the American nation? We can imagine a community that further devolves into fear and bitterness because amidst all the diversity of views, backgrounds, and expressions of identity, the differences seem insurmountable. Or we can imagine a community that looks at all these differences, including those that makes us uncomfortable, and sees something holy. By fulfilling this vision that comes from Sinai, by validating and uplifting even those differences that challenge us, we would truly be able to say that we're one nation under God, indivisible. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom and see you in Shul.